Greetings, I'm Dr. Karl Nath, the Editor-in-Chief of Mayo Clinic Proceedings, and I am pleased to welcome you to the multimedia summary for the journal's July 2019 issue. There are 5 articles that have been selected as our Editor's Choice or Highlights articles this month. Our Editor's Choice is an original article entitled Association of Bezafibrate Treatment with Reduced Risk of Cancer in Patients with Coronary Artery Disease. It is authored by Dr. Zaza Ayakobishvili from the Department of Community Cardiology, Clalet Health Services in Tel Aviv, Israel, and colleagues from several other centers in Israel. Cardiovascular disease and cancer are linked in at least 4 major ways. First, these diseases are the leading causes of mortality, with mortality from cardiovascular disease just eclipsing that of cancer. Second, patients with assorted cardiovascular diseases are at an increased risk for developing cancer. Third, patients with cancer are more likely to develop cardiovascular disease, in large part from the adverse effects of therapies targeted to the underlying cancer. Fourth, cardiovascular diseases and cancer share a number of common risk factors such as tobacco smoking, lack of cardiorespiratory fitness, obesity, and diabetes mellitus. Can this bidirectional relationship between cardiovascular disease and cancer be interrupted or mitigated? The answer is a clear yes as regards to the direction in which cancer, specifically cancer therapy, predisposes to cardiovascular disease. Indeed, this serves as the rationale and basis for the relatively new subspecialty of cardio-oncology. What about the other direction? Do cardioprotective therapies reduce the risk of cancer? Germane to this consideration is this study by Ayakobishvili et al. In the current issue of the Proceedings, demonstrating that patients with coronary artery disease treated with bezafibrate exhibit a reduced incidence of assorted cancers. This study was based on the bezafibrate infarction prevention multicenter double-blind trial, which evaluated the effect of bezafibrate versus placebo on coronary artery events and mortality in patients with coronary artery disease but free of cancer. This trial was conducted between May 1980 and January 1993, and patients were treated with bezafibrate or placebo daily for a median of 6.2 years. Patients were followed up for the incidence of cancer and all-cause death until December 31, 2013, with a median follow-up of 22.5 years. The findings demonstrate that the incidence of all cancers, with the exception of non-small cell lung cancer, was lower in the bezafibrate group, and this reduction in cancer incidence was most marked for hematologic neoplasms. Interestingly, the association of reduced incidence of cancer observed with treatment with bezafibrate was linked not to its lipid-lowering effect, but with an observed reduction in fibrinogen. Ayakobishvili et al. Suggests cellular mechanisms that may account for the anti-cancer effects of bezafibrate, which is an agonist of the peroxisome proliferator activated receptor, and they also speculate on the role of biologic effects of fibrinogen that may promote cancer formation. These fascinating and unexpected findings hint at the distant possibility that there may be therapeutic avenues for fibrates extending beyond their lipid-lowering cardioprotective effects and entering the realm of cancer. Shared risk factors and biologic mechanisms underlie, in part, the cardiovascular disease-cancer connection. Shared therapies that reduce both would be a therapeutic windfall. The first highlight is an original article entitled Cognitive Frailty and Mortality in a National Cohort of Older Adults, the Role of Physical Activity. It is authored by Dr. Irene Esteban Cornejo from the Center for Cognitive and Brain Health, Department of Psychology, Northeastern University, Boston, Massachusetts, and by colleagues from several other institutions in Spain. Cognitive impairment and physical frailty are independently associated with a higher risk of adverse health outcomes, including hospitalization, disability, and mortality. Cognitive impairment varies in severity because of the deterioration in several domains, including memory, learning, and/or executive function. Physical frailty represents a state of increased vulnerability to stress, resulting from reduced capacity in multiple physiologic systems. Both aging indicators share common pathogenetic mechanisms, such as brain alterations, hormonal dysregulation, chronic inflammation, and oxidative stress. Moreover, physical frailty has been consistently linked to cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. Because of such linkages, an international consensus group developed the concept of cognitive frailty as a heterogeneous clinical manifestation characterized by the simultaneous presence of both physical frailty and cognitive impairment in the absence of dementia. Cognitive frailty may impose a greater death risk than physical frailty or cognitive impairment when separately considered, as reported in both community-based and population-based studies. Interestingly, despite the potential effect of regular physical activity to slow cognitive decline and its association with lower mortality in non-frail individuals, studies to date have not investigated whether and to what extent physical activity could attenuate the effect of cognitive frailty on mortality. The purpose of the present study was to examine the association between cognitive frailty and long-term all-cause mortality and the stratified and combined associations of physical activity and cognitive frailty with long-term all-cause mortality in a population-based cohort of older adults. Approximately 3,700 non-institutionalized individuals from Spain, aged 60 years or older, were recruited between April 2000 and April 2001 with follow-up through December 2014. Information on self-reported physical activity and cognitive frailty status were obtained at baseline. The median follow-up was 14 years with a total of 1,634 deaths. The hazard ratio for all-cause mortality among the participants with cognitive frailty compared to robust participants was 1.69. Being active was associated with a mortality reduction of 36% in cognitively frail individuals. Compared to those who were robust and active, participants with cognitive frailty who were inactive had the highest mortality risk with a hazard ratio of 2.13, which was equivalent to being 6.8 years older. The authors conclude that cognitive frailty was more markedly associated with increased mortality in the inactive older adults, and being active significantly reduced the mortality risk among cognitively frail individuals. These novel results highlight that engaging in physical activity could improve survival among cognitively frail older adults. The second highlight is an original article entitled Comparison of Incident Cardiovascular Event Rates between Generic and Brand L-thyroxine for Treatment of Hypothyroidism. It is authored by Dr. Robert Smallridge and colleagues from Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville, Florida and Rochester, Minnesota, and Optum Labs in Cambridge, Massachusetts. A major contributor to the rising healthcare costs in the United States is the cost of innovator and brand name drugs. Discovering, developing, and testing such drugs in preclinical and clinical trials is a long and costly process, taking at least 10 years and exacting what may be billions of dollars in costs. When such drugs come off patent protection, opportunities exist for the introduction of generic prescriptions of essentially the same product. Such generic drugs require approval by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, prior to their prescription. The FDA undertakes a rigorous review process that ensures that the generic drug faithfully copies the brand drug in its active ingredient, bioequivalence, strength, dosage, and route of administration, as well as fulfilling other criteria. Generic drugs are cheaper and save the U.S. healthcare system billions of dollars each year, and account for the vast majority of current drug prescriptions in the United States. Studies demonstrating that their efficacy and safety profiles are similar to that exhibited by the brand name drug thus validate their use and their benefit. Smallridge et al. Compare either brand name or generic L-thyroxine in the treatment of hypothyroidism, one of the most common endocrine disorders. Ineffectively or excessively treated hypothyroidism may cause cardiovascular complications, and thus such complications provide a barometer of the efficacy of treatment of hypothyroidism by either formulation. Using the large database of Optum Labs data warehouse, Smallridge et al. Examined the rates of such complications in patients with largely benign thyroid disease and hypothyroidism who were treated either with generic or brand L-thyroxine. The authors report that there were no significant differences in cardiovascular outcomes as assessed by incident atrial fibrillation, myocardial infarction, CHF, and stroke in patients treated with either brand or generic preparations, the former preparation costing twice as much. At least as regards these outcomes and for the duration of follow-up undertaken in the present study, generic preparation thus achieved comparable efficacy in the treatment of hypothyroidism at a fraction of the cost of brand name preparations. Studies such as these are germane to current attention directed to the high cost of prescription drugs and the role and safety of generic preparations. The third and fourth highlights are original articles that are centered on heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. The first article is Characterization of the Obese Phenotype of Heart Failure with Preserved Ejection Fraction, a relaxed trial ancillary study undertaken by Dr. Yogesh Reddy from Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and colleagues from Mayo Clinic and other U.S. institutions. The second article is entitled The Use of Nitrates and Risk of Cardiovascular Events in Patients with Heart Failure with Preserved Ejection Fraction. This is authored by Dr. Tetsuro Sugimoto and Dr. Hiroshi Kajio from the Center Hospital National Center for Global Health and Medicine in Tokyo, Japan. Accounting for approximately 50% of cases of heart failure and with a rising prevalence, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, abbreviated as HFpEF, represents a syndrome quite distinct from heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. Heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is driven by differing pathophysiologic processes, prominent among which is diastolic dysfunction, and it is not benefited by therapies that are generally salutary for heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, such as angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitors, angiotensin receptor blockers, and beta blockers. There are no specific therapies for heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, and thus a major consideration in managing patients is attempting to ameliorate or avoid conditions that predispose to or exacerbate heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. In the present issue of the Proceedings, two potential exacerbators are studied. In a secondary analysis of the relaxed clinical trial, Reddy et al. Demonstrate that HFpEF patients who were obese when compared with non-obese HFpEF patients were generally more symptomatic and exhibit decreased exercise capacity and quality of life. Obese patients also exhibited higher systemic levels of markers of inflammation, and inflammation markers significantly correlated with the BMI. As adipose tissue is known to produce pro-inflammatory cytokines, Reddy et al. Suggests that the worst outcomes for HFpEF in obese subjects may reflect, at least in part, the adverse effects of pro-inflammatory cytokines produced and released from adipose tissue. HFpEF may also be adversely affected by nitrates, as suggested by the study of Sugimoto and Kajio in the current issue of the Proceedings. In their post hoc analysis of the data obtained from the TopCat randomized trial, Sugimoto and Kajio demonstrated that the risk of major adverse cardiovascular outcomes and hospitalization was significantly higher for HFpEF patients who were treated with nitrates. Interestingly, prior studies demonstrate that HFpEF patients treated with nitrates are significantly less active, and as diminished activity promotes a pro-inflammatory milieu, such a milieu may be a shared mechanism through which the adverse effects of obesity and nitrates are channeled. Another overlapping mechanism may involve nitrosative stress, as obesity and the metabolic syndrome impose such stress, and nitrosative stress was recently identified as a key mediator of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction in a valid murine model. Primum non nocere is a time-honored concept in medical practice and is especially pertinent for diseases that lack a specific therapy. In this regard, the studies of Reddy et al. And Sugimoto and Kajio call attention to the potentially inimical effects of obesity and nitrates respectively in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, and, as a corollary, the need for reducing obesity and for guardedness in the use of nitrates in patients with this disease. You can access these highlights and editor's choice articles free of charge during the entire month of July. When you visit our Mayo Clinic Proceedings website at www.mayoclinicproceedings.org, you will find links to our social media by clicking the buttons at the top of the home page to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. On our YouTube channel, you'll find full-length author interviews called Insights, 60-second video article synopses, and our Mayo Clinic Proceedings fireside chat recordings, which are available from our website on the home page as well as through iTunes. You will also find our online-only feature, Pioneers and Legends in Medicine, which are video interviews of people who have made a strong impact in their field of study. Currently, we are featuring Dr. Carlo Brugnara, a professor of pathology from Boston's Children's Hospital and Harvard Medical School, Boston, Massachusetts, interviewed by our associate editor, Dr. Vincent Rajkumar. You will see many news stories on our website that are based on articles published in Mayo Clinic Proceedings. And finally, you will see other free content and articles published online ahead of print. As always, we greatly thank you for your interest in and your support of Mayo Clinic Proceedings.
We hope you found this presentation from the content of Mayo Clinic Proceedings valuable. Our journal's mission is to promote the best interests of patients by advancing the knowledge and professionalism of the physician community. If you are interested in more information about us, our homepage is www.mayoclinicproceedings.org. There you will find access information for our social media content, such as additional videos on our YouTube channel or journal updates on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter. More information about healthcare at Mayo Clinic is available at www.mayoclinic.org. This video content is copyrighted by Mayo Foundation for Medical Education and Research.